Hello, you're watching Gript Media. My name is Fatima Gunning, and today I will be talking to Dr. Jan van de Beek, who has a PhD in migration economics. Dr. van de Beek was involved in a study called Borderless Welfare State, the Consequences of Immigration for Public Finances. Can you walk us through some of the key findings of that study?
Well, to start with, this study is built on a lot of data. In the Netherlands, we have data on all inhabitants, by that time 17 million inhabitants of the country, detailed data on income, taxes paid, allowances received, cost for healthcare, etc., etc., etc. And what we did is we looked at the fiscal cost of the Dutch average, of Dutch native people, of various groups of immigrants, and we looked at the net fiscal cost or benefit, and we call it net fiscal contribution of all those various groups. And then you see what you get is that, for example, when you look at the immigration motive, asylum is a very costly way of immigration, while labor migration from, for example, Ireland is very positive from the fiscal point of view. So people who come to work in the Netherlands from, for example, Ireland, they contribute positively to the Dutch state, and asylum seekers are very costly. Also, when you look at the region of origin, you see huge differences. For example, people from former guest worker countries like Turkey and Morocco, and more in general, large parts of the Middle East and Africa and the Caribbean, for example, that is, from a fiscal point of view, very costly immigration, while people from, in general, Scandinavia or East Asia or, let's say, Anglo-Saxon countries are contributing a lot. So there's a positive net fiscal outcome. Also, when you look at, for example, the level of education, what we found is that a bachelor or higher means a positive contribution, while lower levels of education means a net cost. There are some levels of education which are kind of in the middle, little plus or a little minus. But that's when you look at the level of education. And also what we found is that when you look at the second or third generation, is that when a group comes to the Netherlands and the contribution is positive or very positive, it means that the second generation is integrated like the average Dutch, and the average Dutch are more or less budget neutral, no high cost, but also no high benefit. So that means that the second generation is doing okay, while when the first generation is not contributing in a positive sense, so it's costing money, a net cost, then the second generation is usually not doing very well. There's one exception, that's the Chinese second generation, but in general, this rule applies to, we looked at 41 different regions of origin in the world, and it applies to almost all regions. So that there is a lot of, let's say, what applies to the first generation is inherited somehow to a very large extent by the second generation. So those are the main findings.
And what was the driving factor between the large immigration numbers in the Netherlands? I believe, is it 17% of the population is foreign born at this point?
Yeah, and then there's quite a large second generation as well. So
okay, and was that done to prop up pension rates, as you'd often hear that we have a kind of a greying population in Europe, and that we need kind of a young workforce coming in from overseas? Was that used as a justification in the Netherlands too?
It is used as a justification, but when you look at the different groups, first we had guest workers, but that was in the 1960s and 70s. And that was because wages were suppressed for a very long time. So employers didn't invest in machines, but they just had access to cheap labor, and they wanted to continue that access to cheap labor. And that's still going on today. That's one form of immigration. Another form is asylum. Simply, we signed treaties like the UN Treaty on Refugees Geneva, and that brought a lot of immigration. And we also had colonies like Indonesia, Suriname, and the Dutch Antilles that brought also, like comparable to the UK, for example, that also brought immigration. So there are diverse groups. And then the latest group, I think, is immigration from mainly Central and Eastern Europe, because we are in the European Union, and it's a constant supply of cheap labor. So that's the fourth group.
The economic benefits in terms of propping up the pension system, do they weigh out? Like, do they bear fruit, like according to what you found, or what did you find?
Absolutely not. The costs of immigration are only half the cost of the aging population. The method to compute the net cost of aging is exactly the same as the method we used to compute the net cost of immigration. And the cost and the net cost of immigration are in the Netherlands twice as high as the net cost of aging. So it's not solving a problem, it's aggravating the problem and making it larger.
And in your study, sorry to interrupt you, in your study you forecast over the period of 2019 to 2040 that immigration would cost the Netherlands 600 billion euros. That seems like a phenomenal sum. How did you reach that conclusion?
By using, let's say, by using the computations we made for the past, and then making simple assumptions about what immigration for the future would be. And I think if we do this computation again, it would already be now much higher due to inflation and due to the fact that immigration has risen over the last few years. So it's just immigration is costing, the net cost of immigration are for the past are also quite high. We computed, we came to a figure of 400 million over the period 1995 and 2019. So we simply use that information to make this forecast. It's not really a forecast, it's a scenario. We had 3 scenarios, and this is the basic scenario.
Is it possible at all that the report undercuts the positive influence immigrants have in the kind of economic activity they generate and also the kind of goods and services they consume?
Well, this is only a fiscal cost and benefit calculation, but what you must understand that if this single figure for a group of immigrants, which can be very high, for example, for people from Ireland, because most of them are expats and well educated, etc., and can be very low, negative for other groups. This is one single figure, but it is correlated with all measures of integration. So it means if this figure is high or low, is positive or negative, this is correlated with level of education, with income, with taxes paid, with benefits received, with crime rates, with the number of mixed marriages in the second generation, with everything. So though it may be possible for certain groups, especially for immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe, that they may be a net cost, and at the same time there are also some economic benefits because they contribute to the economy. In general, this doesn't apply to most immigrant groups, especially, for example, asylum seekers or family migrants from Africa or the Middle East. The net costs are so high and the level of employment is so low that it's absolutely impossible that there is any positive economic effect that may balance the negative fiscal effect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like where are the bulk of the Netherlands asylum seekers coming from? Are they coming from places like Georgia, like we see in Ireland, or are they coming from other regions?
At the moment, Syria, but more in general, it is the Middle East and let's say the Islamic parts of Africa, mostly, like Somalia and other countries.
And one of the things that stood out to me in the study was your reporting on test score results for the children of these. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we had test scores of almost 2 million children And those children are tested when they are 11 years old. And we had test results for the period 2006-2018, so quite a long period, almost 2 million children. And those test results are a little bit comparable to SAT scores, scholastic aptitude tests in the United States, but for younger children. And they are correlated with IQ. So it's a kind of measuring the scholastic aptitude and measuring the general capabilities cognitive capabilities of the children. And it turns out that those test scores are also extremely strongly correlated to all the other outcomes, all the other measures of integration and measures of economic cost and benefit. And those test scores are extremely predictive of what the net contribution of children in the future will be. So lower average test scores. There are huge differences between groups, and those huge differences between groups in those scholastic aptitude test scores, we call them CITO scores, but it's the same, it's comparable at least. Those huge differences are reflected in the net fiscal benefit or net fiscal cost of the groups.
Okay, and can you talk about the birth rate of the native Dutch compared to the birth rate of the foreign-born populace in the Netherlands? Is it equal, or is it much higher or lower? What does it look like?
It is quite comparable, but within the immigrant groups there are differences. For example, birth rates are quite high for people from Africa. For the Dutch, it's currently something like 1.5. In the past, it was 1.6, 1.7 sometimes, but currently it's something like 1.5. This is also the average immigrant. It will be around that number. But within the group of immigrants, there are groups with much higher and much lower birth rates. So, as I said, Africa, high birth rates, and for example, East Asia or Central Europe, much lower birth rates.
And I suppose like the kind of the welfare systems in, rich Western countries are based on a system where, the vast majority of people pay into it, and then, it pays out when you need it. But if there are large numbers of people essentially not contributing to it, what does that look like? Is the Dutch welfare system sustainable going forward?
It is not sustainable. We had a long discussion in the Netherlands about the sustainability of the Dutch welfare state due to the pressures of aging population. But the pressure of immigration is twice as high as the pressure of currently, because it's changing over time, twice as high as the pressure on the system caused by aging. So those two pressures together don't make it into an unsustainable system. So somehow we must activate people more, because we don't have much incentives to work in the Netherlands. Well, skilled people have, because they can earn a lot of money, but low-skilled people don't have. So a lot of people are on benefits. And also we have this influx of, for example, asylum seekers, which by and large become dependent on those benefits. To give you one figure, when you look over the last 10 years, asylum seekers who are not going to school, so adult people who are not going to school, mostly young people, between 1/2 and 2/3 of them were constantly on benefits, on social assistance, while we had extreme labor shortages in the country. So work everywhere, plenty of work, but still between 1/2 and 2/3 of them were on social assistance. So this also must change. This social welfare system lacks incentives to work.
Are there incentives in the Netherlands to help people? Because, I guess you can assume that maybe they can't speak Dutch, or English might not be, they might not be very fluent in English. I think it's a valid point. Like, what kind of barriers and what kind of helps are there to help them enter into the economic activity?
There's on the positive side, there's this kind of integration system which helps you with the language, etc. On the negative side, we have long procedures, and during that time, people are not allowed to work. So they really start in a benefit situation when they enter the country.
Okay.
And also, as I said before, this is a more general problem. If you are on benefits in the Netherlands and you start working, very often your income is decreasing instead of increasing when you're low skilled. For high skilled people, it's completely different, but for low skilled and unskilled people, they don't gain much by working. So this is a more general problem. This has little to do with immigration, but so that's on the negative side. So we could do more. We could make this welfare state more activating.
Mm-hmm. And like, assuming that the findings in your research are correct, like, what does that mean for government policy? Like, what does it mean if politicians? I did listen to a previous interview of yours where you spoke about a certain level of pushback you received because of your findings. It seems like a lot of political figures weren't too happy with what you found. So, like, what happens if these issues are not addressed?
Those are the few questions at one time. First of all, some politicians like it, others don't. So it's depending on the political color. Secondly, politicians like, for example, Mark Rutte, our prime minister, they don't have much incentives to work on this problem because it's very difficult. You have to go to Europe, England, the UK has experience with it. You have to go to Europe and you have to ask for less immigration and more grip on immigration. And that's very difficult because of international treaties and the European Union, etc., etc., etc. So they don't have much incentive to address the problem. But now, of course, the electorate in many countries in Europe is moving to the right and voting for migration critical parties like Habit in the Netherlands, the PVV party of Geert Wilders. You probably have noticed that. He won with 1/3 of the votes, which was unthinkable a few years ago. What will happen if we don't do anything? If we don't do anything about the problem, then this mass migration of low skilled will go on, and our society will move more and more in the direction of let's say the United States with a smaller welfare state. That's, I think, what will happen.
You think that the welfare state will be chopped back?
It is already happening, and it will. That process will slowly continue. Don't expect any explosions to happen or something like that. It will not be a radical shift. It will be gradually the way politicians do things like that. They muddle through and they chop a little bit here and chop a little bit there. But eventually it will, the welfare state will be diminishing.
And I suppose, what will that mean in terms of like daily life? I think, having been born and raised in a rich Western country, it's almost hard to imagine how that could affect, the way we live if this continues unabated.
Yeah, it's maybe hard to imagine, but it's happening. What is worrying me most is that we have groups of immigrants which have a clear ethnic or religious identity, and at the same time are in an underprivileged situation, because that will create a lot of frustration and anger and animosity and polarization in society. That's actually the biggest problem I foresee, and that problem is already. It's happening, it has been happening over the past decades. We are doing that, and we should really stop continuing this policy, because it will aggravate the already existing problems, as I described,
I think, yeah, I mean, in Ireland we have a situation where the government has essentially invited unlimited numbers of people and indeed promised them free houses within 4 months, like their own door accommodation. In a situation where we don't have those houses to give them. So, anyone who has trekked all the way from Africa essentially gets here and then is told oh, actually, sorry, we don't have a house. Here's a 60 € ticket and you can go and get a blanket and sleep on the ground. I think it's very understandable why that person will be extremely frustrated. Are you seeing something similar?
Yeah, things are similar in the Netherlands. We have a implicit promise that all asylum seekers will be housed properly, etc., etc. But it is also, we also run short of houses in the Netherlands. We have the same kind of problems, and I think it happens in many Western countries. It happens in Vancouver, it happens in Australia, it happens in the UK. There's so much influx of immigrants that it's more and more difficult to absorb them. Also with practical things like houses. So we see the same kind of problem. I think one of the things I didn't mention so far is that when we look at the integration indicators of various groups of immigrants, what we see is that immigrants who are doing well, who are integrating, who are having a mixed marriage when they stay in the Netherlands, whose children are doing well in school, those immigrants have a tendency to leave the country relatively quickly.
To leave?
Well, leave. Yes, exactly.
Okay.
The groups, like, for example, the Anglo-Saxon immigrants or East Asian immigrants who are performing above average, have a tendency to leave quickly. While on the other hand, groups that are not performing well, so that are performing below average, far below average often, have a strong tendency to stay in the country. So actually immigrants who are not doing well, who are not integrating well into society, with high crime rates, with low income, with high dependency on benefits and social assistance, whose children are not doing well in school, those immigrants particularly have a tendency to stay in the country.
And why are the successful people, like, why are they leaving?
Because they have opportunities everywhere, because they're high skilled. And the low skilled people have landed in paradise because the Netherlands is resembling Scandinavian countries. So the welfare state is quite extensive. And the schools are free and of a good quality. Healthcare is free and many things are subsidized. So when you have low earning capabilities and you end up in some benefit-like situation in the Netherlands, you have a very strong incentive to stay. So this is a very paradoxical situation. And those immigrants who have a tendency to stay, the higher the cultural distance to Dutch society, to Dutch culture, the larger the tendency to stay. So it's the most culturally distant people have the highest tendency to stay, while the most culturally, let's say, resembling people, immigrants, have a high tendency to leave. And culturally, we didn't measure it ourselves. It is a very large data set which runs over decades in many, many countries. But we computed on basis of this international available data set, we calculated the cultural distance. And then, for example, cultural distance between Ireland and the Netherlands, or Sweden and the Netherlands, or let's say Japan and the Netherlands is not that big. And those immigrants have a tendency to leave, while immigrants from the Islamic African culture cluster, as they call it in this international research, have the largest cultural distance and the highest tendency to stay in the Netherlands. And they have the lowest performance in all respects, in all integration indicators. They have the lowest performance, whether it's healthcare cost or education or crime rates or whatever. So that's very worrying as well to me.
What is the personal cost of, like, putting your name and your face to this research? Like you've mentioned, it's quite controversial in nature.
Yeah, it's a big taboo. Actually, it's very difficult to do this kind of research in academia. That's why I'm currently outside academia, because it's so difficult. Though we had the luck that the University of Amsterdam hosted our research, but when our report came out, they also started to distance themselves from it. So that's very peculiar. So it is career-wise not a very smart thing to do, because this is, in the Netherlands, it's actually a big taboo. You're not supposed to research immigrants, cost of immigration, differences, group differences between various groups of immigrants. That's kind of taboo subject. So that makes you, well, I'm praised by many because they understand finally somebody is making those computations and publishing those findings, and many others don't like it at all.